She messaged me, "I'm pregnant and keeping it, but I want you out of the picture." I replied, "Got it." Then I sent her mother the DNA test from 2 years ago. 20 minutes later, they were both at my door in tears that I was 33 when Claire and I first started dating. At that point in my life, I thought I'd learned enough about relationships to spot red flags early. I wasn't the type to jump from fling to fling. I had a stable job in IT security, a decent apartment, and a handful of close friends I'd known since college. Claire was 27, bright, funny in that sarcastic way that made people lean in, and she had a way of making everyone in the room feel like they were part of an inside joke. But from the beginning, there were little things. She always kept her phone face down, always locked, with notifications off. I'd tease her about being a spy, and she'd just laugh it off. She'd disappear for hours and later explain with vague answers, just running errands, or with a friend. It didn't feel like outright lies, more like omissions. I ignored those signs because when we were together, she was affectionate and attentive. I thought, everyone has quirks, don't be paranoid. The first real rupture happened about a year and a half into our relationship. She told me she was late, maybe pregnant. My stomach dropped, not out of fear. I wanted kids someday, but because of the way she said it. Flat, almost calculated, like it was leverage. I remember asking her how far along she thought she was, and she shrugged. Maybe a month? Maybe more. That maybe more stuck in my head like a splinter. The math didn't line up. Around the time she could have conceived, she'd been distant, going out with her girls almost every night. Something gnawed at me, and for the first time, I didn't just swallow it. I asked for a paternity test. She flipped, tears, yelling, accusing me of being controlling, of ruining a beautiful moment. But when I stayed calm and said, "If it's mine, then we have nothing to worry about," she realized I wasn't budging. Weeks later, we got the results. Not mine. I'll never forget the look on her face, half shame, half defiance. Like she'd been caught, but still wanted to pretend she hadn't done anything wrong. I ended things not long after, though it wasn't some explosive breakup. It was more like a slow fade, me moving my stuff out piece by piece, her pretending everything was fine until I was gone. That was 2 years ago. We didn't stay friends, but because we shared some overlapping circles, mutual friends, a coffee shop we both liked, I'd occasionally hear about her. She dated around, nothing serious. She posted inspirational quotes on Instagram about living authentically and choosing joy. I didn't think about her much. At least, not until I got her message. It was late on a Tuesday night. I'd been working on a presentation for a client and was half asleep when my phone buzzed. I saw her name and hesitated. We hadn't spoken in months. The message was short. "I'm pregnant and keeping it, but I want you out of the picture." I read it 3 times. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was a weird, almost clinical detachment, like my brain shifted straight into analysis mode. There was no preamble, no context, no attempt at a conversation. Just a declaration, like I was an obstacle to be moved. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 years ago, I'd been dragged through emotional hell to prove I wasn't the father. And now she was trying to preemptively cut me off, like she expected me to beg, or fight, or get dramatic. Instead, I typed back 2 words. "Got it." And then I sat there in the glow of my phone, thinking. My pulse wasn't racing. If anything, I felt steady. Because tucked away in my desk drawer, in a manila folder, was the DNA report from 2 years earlier. Official, notarized, time-stamped. A paper shield against whatever narrative she was trying to spin. I thought back to the day I'd gone to the clinic for that test. The sterile smell of the room. The way the nurse had looked at me with quiet sympathy, like she'd seen this scene play out dozens of times. I'd felt humiliated then, reduced to a signature and a swab, like my worth as a man was on trial. But walking out with those results had been a strange relief. Painful, yes, but clarifying. Now, that same piece of paper was about to become useful again. Not as a weapon, but as the truth. Because if Claire wanted me out of the picture, I wasn't going to argue. I was going to step out on my own terms, cleanly, decisively, and with receipts. And I knew exactly who needed to see them first. Her mother. Claire's mom had always been polite to me, even warm at times, but I knew she'd struggled with her daughter's choices. She was the kind of woman who asked questions Claire hated answering. "How are your finances? Are you being honest with him?" I imagine what she'd think of this latest stunt. So I took the folder from my drawer, scanned the report, and composed an email. Short, professional, with the file attached. I didn't embellish, didn't rant, didn't insult Claire. Just facts. When I hit send, I leaned back in my chair and felt something I hadn't expected. Calm. Not triumph, not revenge. Just the quiet certainty that I'd finally stopped playing her games on her terms. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. And when I opened it, Claire was standing there, mascara streaked, with her mother right behind her, eyes sharp as a hawk. The sight of them on my doorstep was surreal. Claire, usually so put together, looked like she'd been crying the entire drive over. Her mascara had bled into dark arcs under her eyes, and she clutched her phone like it was some kind of shield. Behind her, her mother, Margaret, stood stiff, her jaw set, eyes locked on me with that mixture of fury and demand only a parent can muster. "Can we come in?" Margaret asked. It wasn't really a question. I stepped aside, gesturing to the living room. My apartment was neat, everything in its place, as if I'd subconsciously been preparing for this moment all along. Claire sank into the couch, immediately burying her face in her hands. Margaret remained standing, turning to me like a prosecutor. "Is this true?" she said, holding up her phone with my email open. "Yes," I replied. My voice was steady, almost detached. "That's the DNA test from 2 years ago. It proved I wasn't the father of her last pregnancy. I kept the records." Claire let out a strangled noise, half sob, half protest. "Why would you send that? Why drag this up again?" I looked at her, not unkindly, but without flinching. "Because you messaged me tonight saying you're pregnant and you want me out of the picture. That implies to your family, your friends, maybe even legally, that I'm involved. I'm not repeating the same cycle. This time, I'm setting the record straight from the beginning." Margaret's eyes flicked to Claire, who squirmed under the weight of her gaze. "Is he lying?" Silence. Claire shook her head, almost imperceptibly. The room went very still. I could feel the memories of that first ordeal pressing down on me. The sleepless nights, the accusations, the way Claire had tried to spin my request for a DNA test into proof I was paranoid and untrusting. And now, sitting here again, it felt like déjà vu, but with one key difference. I wasn't on the defensive this time. Margaret slowly sat down in the armchair opposite me, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "So you knew last time," she said carefully, "and you still stayed as long as you did?" For a while, I admitted. I wanted to believe things could work, that maybe it was a mistake. But once the truth was undeniable, I left. Claire finally lifted her head, eyes red and shining. "You're making me look like a monster," she whispered. "I'm not making you look like anything," I said evenly. "I'm showing facts. You sent me that message expecting me to disappear quietly. Instead, I chose transparency. What people see is the result of your choices, not mine." Her mother's voice hardened. "Claire, why would you? Why keep doing this? Do you understand what kind of mess you're creating?" I just, Claire's words trailed off. She looked small, diminished, her confidence stripped away. "I didn't want him involved. I didn't think." "That's the problem," Margaret cut in sharply. "You never think past the moment." For the first time that evening, I felt a twinge of pity. Not forgiveness, not even sympathy, but recognition. Claire wasn't some cartoon villain twirling her mustache. She was selfish, impulsive, incapable of facing consequences until they cornered her. That didn't make her harmless, though. In many ways, it made her more dangerous. I excused myself briefly and came back with the manila folder. I placed it on the coffee table, sliding it toward Margaret. "That's the full record. Original copies, notarized. Keep them. You'll need them more than I do." Margaret's hand hovered over the folder, as if it were radioactive. Then she took it, her lips pressed into a thin line. Claire was crying harder now, shoulders shaking. "You didn't have to humiliate me like this," she choked out. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Humiliation comes from being exposed, not from someone else pointing out the truth. If you feel humiliated, it's because deep down, you know this isn't defensible. The words hung heavy in the air. Margaret finally stood, clutching the folder. "We're leaving," she said firmly. Then she turned to me. "Thank you for handling this calmly." Her tone carried both gratitude and shame, like she wished she didn't need to thank me at all. Claire followed her out wordlessly, pausing only once at the door to glance back at me. There was no defiance in her eyes now, only a raw, hollow look. as if she'd finally realized the performance was over and the audience had stopped clapping. When the door shut behind them, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The apartment felt heavier, but quieter, like a storm had just passed. I didn't feel victorious. There was no satisfaction in seeing someone unravel, even someone who had put me through so much. What I felt was clean, like finally setting down a weight I'd carried longer than I should have. That night, I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the empty folder. My phone buzzed a few times, friends in a group chat, a work notification, but I didn't answer. All I could think about was how, 2 years ago, I'd been sitting in almost the exact same place, except back then, I was the one unraveling. Tonight, I was steady. That difference meant everything. I knew this wasn't over. People like Claire didn't just vanish after being confronted. She'd try to rewrite the narrative, maybe spin a story to friends, maybe even circle back to me later with apologies or excuses. But now, I wasn't dreading it. Because I finally understood something simple but powerful. You can't argue someone out of lies. You can only refuse to participate in them. And for the first time in years, I was done participating. Update 1. 3 days passed before I heard from Claire again. The silence almost fooled me into thinking maybe the confrontation had sunk in, that maybe she'd retreat and finally face her choices privately. But then, late Friday night, I got the first of many messages. I overreacted. I didn't mean what I said. Can we talk? I didn't respond. An hour later, you blindsided me with my mom. That wasn't fair. Still nothing from me. By morning, the tone had shifted. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. I just wanted to control my own life. I stared at the words, remembering the calm resolve I'd felt when I sent that email. She still hadn't acknowledged the truth, only the fallout. She wasn't apologizing for lying, only for getting caught. I put my phone down and went about my weekend. Grocery shopping, laundry, an overdue call with my brother. Normal things, grounding things. By Sunday, mutual friends started reaching out. One buddy texted, "Hey man, Claire's been saying you're harassing her? What's going on?" That stopped me cold. I screenshotted the original message she'd sent me. "I'm pregnant and keeping it. But I want you out of the picture," along with my two-word reply and the PDF of the DNA results. Then I sent them to my friend with a short note. "This is the whole story. Believe what you want, but I won't argue about it." His reply came 10 minutes later. "Got it. Sorry she dragged me into it. Won't bother you again." That pattern repeated itself a few more times over the next week. Different people, same playbook. Claire painting me as the aggressor, me quietly dropping receipts into their inboxes. Every time, the noise died down immediately. It struck me how much calmer I felt now compared to 2 years ago. Back then, every rumor, every accusation felt like an attack I had to counter in real time. It consumed me. Now, I treated it like spam mail, document, respond with facts, move on. No heat, no back and forth. By midweek, Claire herself escalated. She showed up outside my building, texting me to come down and talk. I didn't. Instead, I called a locksmith and scheduled an appointment to change the locks that same day, even though she didn't have a key anymore. It wasn't paranoia, it was closure. The next evening, she left a voicemail. Her voice was ragged, almost unrecognizable. "I know I screwed up. I don't even know why I do the things I do. Please don't hate me. I can't handle everyone turning against me." I replayed it once, then deleted it. I didn't hate her. I didn't love her either. I felt neutral. That was the strangest part of all. After everything, my dominant emotion wasn't anger, or vindication, or heartbreak. It was detachment, like watching a storm batter a coastline you no longer live on. A week later, Margaret called me herself. It was the first time she'd reached out since the night she came to my door. "Thank you for sending me the documents," she said. Her voice was weary, but sincere. "I've been dealing with Claire. I don't know what else to say, except I'm sorry you had to be dragged into this again." "You don't need to apologize," I told her. "I'm not involved anymore." "That's the point." There was a pause. "She doesn't understand why you're so calm," Margaret admitted. "She says it's cruel." I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. Calm isn't cruel. It's just not feeding the fire anymore. After we hung up, I sat with that thought for a long time. Claire had always thrived on reaction, good or bad. It didn't matter. She knew how to stir things up, to keep the spotlight on her, to drag others into the chaos. But when I stopped reacting, stopped giving her any fuel, she was left with only herself. That was the one consequence she never seemed able to face. By the end of the month, the messages dwindled. Mutual friends stopped asking questions. The storm was losing energy. And I realized something important. Closure doesn't come when the other person apologizes or changes or validates your pain. Closure comes when you no longer need anything from them at all. I was finally there. Final update. It's been a little over 2 months since Claire showed up on my doorstep with her mother. The dust has mostly settled now, and I feel like I can finally write this with some distance instead of raw adrenaline. Claire did try a few more times after the voicemail I mentioned in my last update. A couple of texts with the usual mixture of guilt and self-pity. You don't know what I'm going through. Everyone's turned against me. Thanks to you. I just needed support. I didn't respond. The last message came 3 weeks ago, and since then, silence. Margaret called once more to let me know she was helping Claire with her situation. She didn't go into details, and I didn't ask. It wasn't my business anymore, and I meant that. I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, though. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that comes from watching someone you love sabotage themselves over and over. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. In the time since, my life has returned to something resembling normal, though normal feels different now. I go to work, I meet friends for dinner, I hit the gym, I've even started planning a short trip I'd been putting off for years. But there's a subtle shift in how I move through the world. Before all of this, I was the kind of person who second-guessed myself constantly in relationships. If someone accused me of being too suspicious, I'd wonder if they were right. If they pushed me to accept behavior that made me uncomfortable, I'd rationalize it as me being overly sensitive. I bent because I didn't want to break anything. But bending that much broke me anyway. Now, I've realized that self-respect isn't about drawing dramatic ultimatums or grand gestures. It's about the quiet, steady refusal to compromise on your own dignity. When Claire sent me that message, I'm pregnant and keeping it, but I want you out of the picture. She probably expected a fight, or begging, or maybe even compliance. She didn't expect 2 words. Got it. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. You don't have to engage with manipulation. You don't have to play on a rigged field. You can just walk off it. The fallout wasn't easy. Having mutual friends question me, hearing lies whispered behind my back, watching someone unravel publicly, it wasn't pleasant. But because I had my documentation, because I'd stayed calm, I didn't crumble the way I had 2 years ago. Instead, I let the truth speak for itself. And truth, though it moves slower than rumor, lasts longer. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some grief. Not grief for Claire herself. I'd already mourned that relationship years ago, but grief for the wasted energy, the time spent trying to fix something that was never mine to fix. I look back at the version of me who sat in a clinic 2 years ago, waiting for that DNA test, stomach knotted with fear, and I want to tell him, you're stronger than you think. You don't need her validation. You only need the truth. These past weeks, people have asked me if I feel vindicated. Honestly, no. Vindication implies victory, and this doesn't feel like winning. It feels like standing on scorched earth after a fire, alive, intact, but surrounded by the ruins of what used to be. You're grateful you survived, but you don't cheer. I think that's what people misunderstand about justice in personal relationships. It's not about triumphing over the other person. It's about reclaiming your own narrative, your own peace, after someone's tried to hijack it. For me, that peace looks like mornings where I drink my coffee without checking my phone for drama. Evenings where I can go out with friends without wondering if someone's going to pull me aside and repeat the latest rumor. Nights where silence doesn't feel ominous. It just feels like quiet. I don't know what Claire will do next, and it's not my responsibility to know. Maybe she'll learn. Maybe she won't. Maybe this was her rock bottom. Maybe she hasn't hit it yet. That's her journey, not mine. What I do know is that the lesson I took from this will stay with me. Protect your self-respect, document your truth, and when someone tries to drag you into chaos, choose silence over reaction. Silence, it turns out, is louder than shouting. So that's where I'll leave this. Not with revenge, not with some grand poetic justice, but with something far quieter and far more valuable, freedom. And after everything, that's enough.